And as we mentioned earlier, the president is expected to sign the sweeping overhaul of the nation's financial industry as early as Wednesday of next week. Regulation reform passed the Senate on Thursday. It puts the toughest restrictions on banks and Wall Street firms since the Great Depression. And joining us this morning is Sumner LaCroix. He's a UH economics professor of UHERO. Good morning, Sumner, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Mahia.
Huge reform that just passed, and so let's go over some of the major revisions. I know that you actually looked at the bill. It's, what, that tall?
2,300 pages long. Yeah,
My goodness.
Enormous.
So what about the problem of the too big to fail banks? What are lawmakers doing about that?
Well, the lawmakers have created a new council headed by the Treasury Secretary, and the council has the power to monitor all financial firms, whether they're banks or other financial firms, such as insurance companies. And it looks at their activities and sees what it tries to monitor whether or not their activities have the risk of bringing down the entire financial system. If they believe that their activities are getting too risky, that this new council now has the power to impose new capital requirements, disclosure requirements, liquidity requirements on these firms. They can also force the breakup of large financial firms. So this is really massive new powers being given to this council.
But what if the banks, are they too big to get in trouble? That's the big question.
Well, now what happens if a bank does get in trouble? Okay, then what the bill requires is that all big banks essentially lay out a plan for bankruptcy in advance, and that if problems do come up, then the FDIC is given powers to try to quickly liquidate these banks using this new in advance bankruptcy plan. The idea is that the banks will be liquidated within 1 to 2 weeks. Any costs would be paid by a tax on banks with more than $50 billion worth of assets. This essentially would mean then that you wouldn't find the federal government bearing the costs of future bailouts. Still, if there's a tax on these banks, we may find the public bearing some of the costs of the future bailouts via the tax being passed on to the public.
Now, it also creates a Bureau of Consumer Financial Protections. What exactly is that? And overall, do you think this bill will work?
Okay, so this new Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection is going to be housed inside the Fed, and it's going to have wide-ranging powers to essentially regulate all loans being given out to consumers. The only loans that are exempt are automobile loans. The automobile industry got itself an exemption from this package. We don't really know what it's going to look like until it actually comes into being, but it also has tremendous powers to regulate virtually all loans and to basically say these types of terms aren't going to be allowed, these types of terms will be, this kind of disclosures have to be made in advance. There's also the influence of Senator Dan Akaka here in this bill, because Senator Akaka has been a champion of consumer literacy. The whole idea here is it's not enough just to regulate the financial institutions. We also need to make sure that consumers are financially literate, and that unless consumers are financially literate, they're still not going to be able to figure out what's good for them and what's bad for them. So this essentially empowers this agency to take enormous initiatives in this area of consumer financial literacy. Will the bill work? Well, there are some problems with the bill. One is it's more of the same. It's more regulation. It's more regulation being put onto the financial sector. And one of our biggest problems last time around with the current financial crisis was that the regulation didn't work. So now we're basically saying that there's going to be more regulation. I think it's probably better than nothing. On the other hand, there's a major omission from the bill, and that is that the bill doesn't regulate the two big mortgage relenders, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That's a problem. That's something Congress has to deal with down the road if we're really going to look at having financial reform that leads to less risk of a financial crisis in the United States.
Sumner LaCroix, thank you so much for joining us. And next Friday, you're going to be talking about some of the Hollywood productions are here and the economic impact from that. So, Sumner, appreciate it.